Mama's got her news anchor hair on today.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, but when I went...
Hi, hello, and welcome back. Or if you are new here, welcome. My name is Heather. This is Miss Finn. And in this video, we're going over Part 1, Chapter 3 from The Body Keeps the Score, looking into the brain, the neuroscience revolution. This chapter is about what they learned about how trauma affects the brain, particularly during flashbacks, thanks to the advent of technologies like PET scans and fMRIs. He said that the early technology of measuring brain chemicals like serotonin and norepinephrine, which fuel the brain, was a lot like trying to understand how a car engine works by studying gasoline. Whereas this new technology enabled them to actually look at and in the engine itself. For the first study he did, the participants worked with a research assistant to come up with a script that described one of their traumatic experiences moment by moment. And they really focused on aspects like sounds, images, and feelings, rather than the actual story or the factual sequence of events. Like, when this happened, I felt this, or I looked over and saw this and felt this, rather than this happened and then this happened and then this happened, so on and so forth. And they also created another script that described a scenario where they felt safe and in control to get a baseline reading. And for the study, the participants listened to recordings of these scripts as they laid in these imaging systems. As expected, listening to the script of the traumatic experience activated the same physiological responses that they'd had during the event. And also as expected, their blood pressure and heart rate didn't change while they listened to the safe script. Of course, none of this was news to the researchers. So let's talk about the stuff that was. Speechless horror. They found that when someone is triggered, the right side of their brain lights up and the left side basically shuts down. Oh, we gotta stretch.
Oh my gosh.
Oh. So what does that mean? Well, the Broca's area, which is the speech center of the brain, totally goes offline. Quote, "We had visual proof that the effects of trauma are not necessarily different from, and can overlap with, the effects of physical lesions like strokes." End quote. And according to Dr. Vanderkolk, all trauma is pre-verbal. Quote, "Even years later, traumatized people often have enormous difficulty telling other people what has happened to them. Their bodies re-experience terror, rage, and helplessness, as well as the impulse to fight or flee. But these feelings are almost impossible to articulate. Trauma, by nature, drives us to the edge of comprehension, cutting us off from language based on common experience or an imaginable past." End quote. Dr. Vanderkolk points out that this doesn't mean people can't talk about their traumatic experience. In fact, it's very common for people to come up with a cover story, a more publicly acceptable version of what happened, in order to explain their symptoms and behaviors to other people. Quote, "These stories, however, rarely capture the inner truth of the experience. It is enormously difficult to organize one's traumatic experiences into a coherent account, a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end." End quote. Another interesting find was that during flashbacks, the part of our brains that register images when they first enter our brains lights up, meaning our brains react as if the trauma was actually occurring. During flashbacks, the right side of the brain lights up and the left side of the brain goes dark. So let's dig a little more into what that means. Quote, "The right is intuitive, emotional, visual, spatial, and tactual, and the left is linguistic, sequential, and analytical." End quote. The two sides also process memories in very different ways. The right side recalls sound, touch, images, smells, the emotions of events. The left side recalls facts, statistics, and the vocabulary of events. It's what we use to translate our feelings into words, to describe our experiences, and put them in sequential order. And this is the side that shuts down during flashbacks. Quote, when something reminds traumatized people of the past, their right brain reacts as if the traumatic event were happening in the present. But because their left brain is not working very well, they may not be aware that they are re-experiencing and reenacting the past. They're just furious, terrified, enraged, ashamed, or frozen. End quote. And this also explains why the passage of time has no effect on traumatic memories. It doesn't matter if this was something that happened decades ago. The part of our brain that processes them and recalls them behaves as if it's happening in real time. Stuck in fight or flight. We all know about our stress response system, right? Fight or flight. The activation of our stress response system is really hard on our bodies, and it also kind of shuts down our thinking brain, or at least turns it way down. Don't think, just act. Under normal conditions, the stress response system is activated temporarily and shuts down as soon as the threat has passed. Because again, it's really hard on our bodies. What Dr. Vanderkolk found is that the stress response in traumatized people spikes really quickly and disproportionately to mild threats or stimuli, and also takes a lot longer to shut down and go back to baseline. And this chronic or prolonged activation of the stress response, aka toxic stress, causes all kinds of problems for your health, memory, attention, sleep, and so much more. See my video on the Adverse Childhood Experiences study to learn more. It is the #1 public health crisis hiding in plain sight. This is why there's an increased risk and prevalence of substance dependence amongst traumatized people. They're ingesting substances to override their chronically activated or very sensitive stress response. Dr. Vanderkolk said that there's also another response to threats that they haven't been able to measure with their scans yet. And that's that some traumatized people go into denial, more or less. Even though their body registers the threat, their conscious mind goes on as if nothing happened. But even though their minds have learned to ignore the signals from their emotional brain, the signals and the stress response doesn't stop. Their scans also showed that traumatized people can be triggered by all kinds of things that are considered a normal part of everyday life. Because remember, their stress response systems spike really quickly and disproportionately to mild threats and stimuli. He goes on to talk about how for over 100 years, every psychology and psychotherapy textbook has said that talking about distressing feelings or traumatic memories is the best method to process and resolve them. Quote, however, as we've seen, the experience of trauma itself gets in the way of being able to do that. No matter how much insight and understanding we develop, the rational brain is basically impotent to talk the emotional brain out of its own reality. I am continually impressed by how difficult it is for people who have gone through the unspeakable to convey the essence of their experience. It is so much easier for them to talk about what has been done to them, to tell a story of victimization and revenge, than to notice, feel, and put into words the reality of their internal experience. End quote. And that's it for chapter 3. It was a really short one, like 10 pages. I wish I would have checked after reading chapter 2, and because I would have just combined this with that, but here we are. Okay, kiddos, here's what I think the key takeaways are from this chapter. And please bear with me, my brain is not working today. Number 1, traumatized people have a highly sensitive stress response system that spikes quickly to even mild threats and stimuli, and takes longer to shut down and return to baseline. Number 2, when traumatized people are triggered, the right brain reacts as if the traumatic event were happening in the present, and the left brain shuts down, meaning they may not be aware that they're re-experiencing something from the past, and their speech center goes offline, making it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for them to articulate their experience, and can render traditional talk therapy methods less effective or ineffective. Please put anything I missed down in the comments. I don't know why my brain isn't cooperating with me. Thank you. I found that this chapter was really helpful for me to understand my own experience of trauma better. I've had more traumatic experiences in my life than I could ever recount, like going back to early childhood. And for a really long time, until about 5 years ago, actually, I was always able to carry on in the wake of those experiences as though nothing had happened. Like the people whose response was essentially denial of the experience. Of course, we know that's also thanks to my dissociative disorder. But about 5 years ago, I had another traumatic experience. And honestly, it's one that I'd had a handful of times before, so nothing new. But that experience was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And my whole system for dealing with trauma completely fell apart. I completely fell apart. And what was really frightening and confusing, and that I didn't really understand until having read this chapter, was that after that experience, just normal parts of everyday life that I had coexisted with up until that point now triggered a full-on flashback or dissociative blackout. And things have gotten a little better now, but for years following that incident, this would happen multiple times a day. And just add to my agoraphobia, I feel like I understand it a little better now. As always, I'd love to know what you guys think, so put all your thoughts down in the comments and I will respond to them. Let me see, what is the next chapter? Because now we're going to be on part 4. Part 2, this is your brain on trauma. Chapter 4 is Running for Your Life, the Anatomy of Survival. If you liked this video, please consider liking it. It helps me out a lot.
Like, subscribe, comment, blah, blah, bloody blah. Thank you very much.
Finn, do you want to add anything? Okay, bye.